Well, hello and welcome to the Wine Access Unfiltered podcast. Once upon a time, if you can believe it, Napa Valley was not the household name that we know it to be today. And no one ever dreamed it was possible to grow wine thousands of feet above sea level on snow-capped mountains in South America. But through discovery and persistence and a willingness to color just a little bit outside the lines, tiny up-and-comers transformed into world-class wine regions that we know and love today. So with that in mind, we are back with a brand new set of podcast Wine Club wines and kicking it off with an episode that sort of ties all of these themes together. We are talking about finding wine in unexpected places, or as I like to call it, where the wild things are. One of my favorite books as a kid. So if you've been following along this season, you know that we've been doing episodes around how to be a savvy wine buyer, focusing on helping you get the knowledge to go out into the world, make great wine buying decisions for yourself, figure out what your palate likes, everything from unlocking gems in Piedmont to figuring out how to spot the good stuff, just like a wine importer like we recently just talked about with our friends Sarah and Jonah Beer from True North. But today we're going to encourage you to dig just a little bit deeper, going to get a little bit more uncomfortable and look in the spots where no one else is looking. And to borrow from our friend Anthony Bourdain, discover the parts unknown. Journey to places a little left of center. And so we're going to be doing that with a little help from someone who loves doing that just as much as I do, probably even more so because his passion can be seen via his wine show, V is for Vino, a sort of Alton Brown meets Anthony Bourdain style show that's now in its 5th season. Please welcome to the show, Vince Anter.
Hey, thanks for having me. You're going for my job. You're quite the orator. That was a beautiful intro.
I think that there are not enough people who do what we do in this world. And I'm thrilled that we're finally connecting because, for as much as we've lived these sort of parallel lives, our paths have not intersected as of yet.
No, I thank God for the digital era. I've got to do this kind of thing with a lot of people in the wine space that maybe I haven't run into in person, but we get to do these, whether it's a podcast or just meet up online. So very happy to be here.
Good. And you are Chicago born and raised, sounds like, maybe?
So Cleveland born and raised, but I came to Chicago for school, went to DePaul University. That's kind of where I fell in love with wine. We can get into that if you want, but I was working in restaurants here, fell in love with wine, decided to move out to LA to be a rock star. It was the original goal. Didn't quite work out, but it's okay because then I was still getting into wine, got into the wine path, and then came back to Chicago after I had kind of finished my time in LA. So now Chicagoland.
I mean, 2 amazing places to spend your life, both great food cities. I also did not start in wine. I started off not wanting to be a rock star, but wanting to be a, Broadway belter, jazz hands slinging. Yeah, I have a degree in musical theater. I did the whole thing. I worked, did the whole thing. And then I decided that wine was way more fun. You get to go to better places and wear more comfortable shoes most of the time. So yeah, that's how I got into this
Now
gig.
that you're telling me that, it makes sense with your personality. So I was captain of my show choir. So I also did all of that. Yeah. I didn't want to be on Broadway. That wasn't the goal, but I had done all the theater, musical theater. And I think there's a part of the brain I know so many musicians and creatives who then gravitate towards wine down the line. I think it's like the same part of the brain.
And so tell me about the show started how many years ago? Because you're in your 5th season now.
Yeah, show started in 2016. I had the idea. I filmed the first few episodes, very bootstrappy, whatever we could do, however we could get it done. First episodes came out 2018. And then now we're on, like you said, 5 seasons, 21 episodes and counting. And they're full hour-long kind of docu-style education meets travel, food and wine episodes. I wanted to bring people to the place wine is made. I mean, if you love wine, what's special about it is the place that surrounds it. And I just felt like there wasn't a lot of video-based resources bringing you to the place that the wine was made. at least in a kind of fun, lighthearted way. And that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, no, it's so funny. People have always critiqued wine-based shows for not being interesting enough. And, the argument against having more wine-focused content is like, well, food is much more enticing to look at. And I'm like, have you ever been to a wine region? Number one, it's like the most beautiful places because wine is never or rarely grown in ugly places. And two, where there is good wine, there is always good food. So I love throughout the episodes, there's always some great food intertwined in there. Yeah,
food stories. There's stories behind every winemaker and how they got into it and what their philosophy is. There's also, I worked hard. I was conscious of what you said, that like wine can maybe look the same on camera, and maybe not the vineyard, but the wine in the glass, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was conscious of that going in. I said, okay, how can we kind of enhance this and bring value to the viewer? And so what we did was really incorporate a lot of the educational elements. So if you're just trying to learn wine, I mean, the reason I started the show was because I took my certified sommelier exam with Court of Masters and I did some WSET. And I just found that process to be kind of arduous and tedious, especially if you didn't work in the wine space. If you work in the wine space, no problem. I'll go study flashcards. But what about average consumers who want to like understand what's in their glass, but maybe don't want to take the test? And so we brought that element to the show, the digital, the maps and breaking down the grapes and some wine topics. And that's something we have a passion for, is kind of free, accessible wine education.
I think it's great. I think if there's one thing that the wine world has missed out on is the fact that learning about wine is incredibly fun. It does not require flashcards. I don't know why we have not embraced this idea that like we can drink, we can eat, we can play, we can do all of these things, and we can do it in multiple different countries around the world. So like, why are we not doing more of that? So I love that you bring that to the people. We are going to jump into a few things that are happening in the wine world right now. Given that you were once a Chicago guy, I assume that you're sort of a pizza lover. So my question to you is, what are your feelings on Lambrusco and why do you think it's the best pizza wine out there?
Oh, I do love Lambrusco with pizza. I do. So there's several different pizza places in the city that vie for the attention of best. We actually did a Chicago episode, and I went to Lou Malnati's, and I met Mark Malnati, who's
nice.
The kind of the second generation. Got to make a pizza with him. I actually paired it with Syrah at the time, but that's because I was trying to bring in a Syrah. Like, to me, yes, Lambrusco, not just pizza, but a lot of red sauce stuff, because Lambrusco is fun. If you're having a fun meal, like when are you having pizza? You're probably having it with family or friends. It's lighthearted. Maybe you ordered it in. You're not sitting down at a formal place. Lambrusco is the same type of wine. It's like affordable. It's fun. I remember when I first had Lambrusco, I was like a college kid. I didn't study wine yet. And I went to a restaurant and the waiter suggested it and brought it out to me. And the first time you have sparkling red wine, your head explodes, right?
Yes.
And so it's just a fun wine, and it just kind of plays so nicely with a fun dish like pizza.
I agree. So we did a whole episode on Lambrusco and Prosecco a few months ago with our friend Matthew Kainer. And when we did that episode, I brought up, this idea of Riunite, and Riunite was like such a big thing in the 80s and early 90s. Like I even brought it to my mom, and my mom, she was like, I know that jingle. And I was like, this was such a cultural phenomenon back then. I would love to see Riunite have a resurgence. Is it my favorite Lambrusco? Admittedly, no, but I appreciate its existence in the wine world. And I have to tell you, I'm super excited because Riunite in all of its glory is back. They are bringing back the Riunite on Ice, so nice campaign. And now it's Riunite on Ice, still nice. So I feel like maybe we could see a little bit of a push into more Lambruscoage, because to your point, it's so delicious with so many foods and so many settings. And I, like you, I remember being younger and working in a restaurant, and somebody brought I think Molly Duker back in the day. I don't know if they still make it. They make some sort of sparkling red Syrahs or something. And same with you, my mind was blown, and I was like, I want more red sparkling wines. They're so good. Do you have a favorite? First of all, how do you feel about Riunite on Ice, so nice coming back?
I do have a fun anecdote about Riunite, which is my father worked in the wine import space. And but this is before I was born, but he got out of that, got into a restaurant, but he was a big, they were one of the like largest importers of Riunite in the country. And so my basement was full of all sorts of like merch basically for Riunite, including like patio umbrellas and furniture. So like that's my first core memory of that brand.
No way. Wait, do the umbrellas still exist? Because I would definitely throw a Riunite umbrella up on my deck for sure.
I'll have to ask my dad. I'll find out for you.
Well, I'm a fan. I hope to see more Lambrusco come up with the rising tide that is Riunite. But I love that it's coming back, and I think that you do such a great job of bringing wine to the consumers, and I think more brands need to be sort of following suit and like making it fun again. And I think we actually like flashed the commercial up on our YouTube channel when we put that last episode out. So I'll flash it up again in case anyone's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is a very big thing. And if you Google Riunite on ice, you'll get to see these old school commercials. So that's what's going on in Lambrusco world. What's happening in spirits world is, are you ready for this? Beyonce has entered the chat.
Yeah, so she did a bourbon or a cognac?
Neither, technically. She's doing an American whiskey. With a flavor profile similar to that of Japanese whiskey. She is launching or partnering with LVMH to do a whiskey called Sir Davis that is just about to be, actually it'll be released by the time this episode is out. It's $89. It is a mix of 51% rye, 49% malted barley. And it was also codenamed Destiny since it's been years in the making, which I absolutely love. Thoughts, feelings, how do I feel?
Yeah, so I like that she's doing it Japanese style because there's enough American bourbon style whiskeys on the market. I actually went to Japan last year, just vacation, not for the show. And it was incredible. But the number one thing that I had every day was I had Japanese highballs, which are Japanese whiskey, super cold, super carbonated soda, and lemon. And that's like their go-to drink there. It's delicious. And so I don't know, if I was her, I'd be pushing that cocktail because it's a non-whiskey lovers way to introduce into Japanese whiskey. Japanese whiskey is like a hybrid between the sweet, caramely, bourbon-esque and the super smoky scotch. It's a little bit of both. And so it can be a bit different for people who aren't used to that, who maybe don't drink whiskey straight, especially. And so if you can make it in a cocktail, so I wouldn't be surprised if I see a campaign kind of pushing the whiskey highball.
Yeah, I love it. I don't think I've ever had a whiskey highball, but that sounds delicious. And they're apparently opening a like tasting room of sorts in Texas. So that's coming in 2025. So I don't know, maybe when they do that, they can have like a signature Beyonce highball spritzer, whatever they want to call it.
The cool thing about the highball is the thing that makes it, you can make it at home, no problem. But the thing that makes it is actually a special machine that has super chilled, super carbonated water, like more carbonation than you can possibly put in a regular soda. And the reason is because they super chill it. So when you chill water, you can actually get more bubbles into it, kind of like champagne, actually.
Yep.
And so that's what makes that cocktail. And so I guarantee you when this place opens, they're going to have one of those special machines in that tasting room.
Interesting. Yes, for our science nerds out there, if you want a little Bill Nye segment, the absorption rate of CO2 is higher in that of colder liquids, which is why you want to keep your champagne cold even after it's been open, because you can keep more of the bubbles inside. And also, conversely, if your champagne is warm when you open it, all of the CO2 wants to immediately explode. So that's why your champagne explodes so much faster. Super fascinating. I did not know about the highball. I will definitely check it out. I also did not know that Beyonce was a whiskey girl. I assumed that she was like a champagne.
I don't know. Maybe that's the new country Southern, album is like, this is meant to pair with that.
Yeah. I feel like everything I've ever read about Beyonce is like, she doesn't drink because she cares very much about her complexion. And despite the fact that I also care about my complexion, I enjoy drinking. So I've weighed the pros and cons in that. But I'm happy to see our girl drinking a little whiskey. I don't know if Jay-Z is going to be drinking some Ace of Spades alongside, but I'm here for all of it. The other thing that I'm here for is you guys jumping into the podcast wine club. We, as I just mentioned, have a brand new shipment that just came out with the wine that we're going to be drinking in just a second. You can get all 4 of these wines in this shipment by checking out the description below. It's 4 wines that I hand select. You're going to get them about every other month. It's $120 plus tax, but including shipping, and you're going to get 10% off of all of your wine access purchases. And what else do I need to mention? Well, if you haven't liked and subscribed to this podcast, this is your opportunity to do that. So whether you are watching it in full on YouTube, whether you're listening to this on Spotify, iTunes, or whatever your podcast platform choice is, we definitely encourage you to do that. And also, please, 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 please leave us a little review. We always appreciate that. We're going to jump into discovering where the wild things are in just a second. If you are a member of the Podcast Wine Club, the wine that you should be getting right now is the Domaine Gassier Coucardie 2021 Blanc. It is in a burgundy-shaped bottle. You want to get that nice and cold today for yourself. And if you've got a burgundy glass, grab that. Or if you've got an all-purpose Gabrielle glass like I've got here, you can grab that. Either way, we will see you back here in just a second. All right, Vince, first and foremost, a virtual cheers with our very golden white wine. Do you have a Gabrielle glass as well?
I do. This one's actually custom. Can you see the, got my logo on it, where you haven't started selling them yet, but we're going to.
Oh my gosh, amazing. I want custom Gabrielle glasses. Where is Joda Beer on this? Hello. All right, well, cheers to you. This smells amazing. You take the first sip. I'm going to tell everybody what is going on in this wine glass. So the producer here is Domaine Gassier. We are in a little known region called the Costieres de Nimes. This is sort of wedged between the southern Rhone and Languedoc-Roussillon, that like southern France appellation. So we're in kind of no man's land here, except for, of course, this little AOP. And this is a blend of 3 white grapes, 40% Roussanne, 40% Viognier, and 20% Grenache. Couple interesting things here. Number one, this is farmed organically, which we love. I know that, Vince, you did an episode on the Languedoc-Roussillon, and I didn't know this when I watched this, that it has more organically and or biodynamically farmed vineyards than I think anywhere else in the world. So we love that. This is fermentation by native yeast in French oak barrels. So if you're wondering where some of this color is coming from, this really nice, beautiful golden color, one, it is definitely coming from the grape itself. So these grapes can produce more yellowy golden hues, but also even just that small amount of time in 500-liter French oak barrels can give it this really nice golden color. This was aged on the lees with batonnage, which means that they, after fermentation, they let all those dead yeast cells sit with that juice, sort of like you would see in champagne. And over time in those barrels, they're going to mix those lees up. And that's what's giving it that really lovely, rich texture, those gorgeous little bready, yeasty aromas. And then this does see partial malolactic fermentation. So that thing that we see very often in Chardonnay, that conversion of malic acidity to lactic acidity. So that green apple sharp acidity moving toward that lactic milky acidity. So sometimes you get that sort of buttery compound. This is partially going through that. So that's again where some of that viscosity is coming from, but also some of those really gorgeous sort of golden buttery hues. I also want to mention, not that we really give a damn about points, but a very impressive score, I have to say, for this wine. 95 points from Jeb Dunnick for like a $20-something bottle of white wine from the Costieres de Nimes. For this to get for 95 points is very impressive. That is all I'm going to say on the matter. I'm going to let us drink this wine. You have like a smile the size of Alaska on your face right now, which makes me so happy.
Tongue when you were saying all those things, because I have so many things to say about.
Okay,
about
tell
this
me.
wine.
Take the stage. Go for it.
The first thing is that you like picked my style of wine. I don't know how you did that without knowing my favorite styles of wine, but like slightly oxidative, medium plus, but still great acidity. Wines like this, like oxidative Chenin Blanc or something like that, are some of my favorite wines on the planet. So I love that they're doing kind of the triple oxidation slash like nutty. They're doing the fermentation in probably used oak, I would imagine. They're doing the lees aging, and then they're doing a little bit of mallow to kind of round out that creaminess, but still a super fresh wine. And that's why I love these wines from the south of France. Whereas if you put it in other places, I feel like sometimes, and you did all those things, you might get an overly rich wine. This wine is still
soupy mess.
Yeah, this is very, very fresh. I love that we're in like almost overripe yellow fruit land. Like some of those overripe peaches and apricots and yellow flowers. I love wines that are, again, like in yellow, white wines that are in yellow fruit land and yellow flower land. So this is right up my alley. You mentioned about the organic and biodynamic. I mean, one of the great things about not just Languedoc, but Southern Rhone in the same sense, is it's really easy for them to do biodynamics and organics because they have these great winds, both coming from the north with the Mistral winds and then coming from the south with the ocean breezes. And so it keeps the vineyards dry. It keeps any of that mold, rot, mildew, anything from happening. And then the warm climate kind of burns anything off too. You're very hot. You have a lot of sunshine. It's like Southern California down there, right? Yeah. So you get a lot of great sunshine. And so you end up with a place that is really conducive to making wines that require little intervention. So I love that about, this place.
Yeah, not a ton of disease pressure to really any to speak of. So, I mean, I think when you think of how many vineyards there are farmed organically, and you also think of California, I think the two places, not similar to look at, but if you put them on paper and talk about like what makes them really appealing, there's a lot of similarities between California and the southern parts of France, like we're in here. I love all the descriptors that you use for this wine. I think color, and I'm not talking about like the actual physical color of the wine, the color that this sort of invokes when like you drink this wine, you're like, oh, I'm in like yellow land versus being in like green land when you're talking about Pinot Grigio or Sauvignon Blanc. I also really love being in yellow land, especially for this time of year. So we're going to be, this episode is coming out in September. As well as obviously this podcast wine shipment. And so as we move into like these slightly cooler months, I'm not quite ready to give up white wine. Not that we have to give it up for the cooler months, but I also want something with like a little more texture and a little more body, but I still want something that's really lively. And this for me fits that bill like by a landslide. We also recently just had a Chenin Blanc in the club that I think, is sort of a stepping stone into this wine, but I'm super happy with how this is drinking. If you love wines like this, the things that you want to look for are, number one, the grapes are really what's giving this so much texture, but also we mentioned the fermentation styles, so that batonnage, the lees aging, and then the malolactic fermentation. So très delicious. Have you been to this specific part of the southern France or no?
No. So that's the other thing about kind of this whole area is there is so much to explore. Languedoc is the largest wine region in the world, and right next to it, Southern Rhone has 1,000,001 of these little villages. So I didn't go specifically to here, but what is fun is that you can find anything you're looking for in this whole sphere of the south of France. Like whatever you want exists there. And the other fun thing is they're not afraid to change with the trends. So I've noticed when I was there, right now lighter style wines, lower alcohol style wines are popular. So we would have thought Southern Rhone blends, especially like the GSM blends, they used to be very big. They'd put a lot of Mourvèdre in them. They'd be these big 14.5, 15% alcohol wines. Now they're putting more Grenache. They're harvesting maybe a little earlier. They're making leaner style wines. And they're kind of going with the trend. So it's really fun because not every region will kind of pivot based on what consumers are looking for. Some of them just kind of stick with what they know.
Well, especially in France where tradition is tradition. We don't stray from the path. That's an interesting point. The very first wine region I ever visited was the Languedoc-Roussillon back in like 2012. And to me, like it was the first time I really understood this idea of what grows together goes together, because you've been there, right? It's very relaxed. It's very easygoing. Lots of like foods being cooked over fire. And so the wines really like spoke to that. But I think it makes sense that the trends would evolve with the times, with how people are drinking versus just sticking with like tradition and what's always been. I think an interesting example of that, I just saw somebody posted on Instagram that Gerard Bertrand just put out like a cloudy unfiltered, either like pet nat or white wine. And obviously he's a very big producer there, but I thought that was very interesting for someone that, has like a pretty big footprint in that region to put out something that is definitely more of like a trendy style of wine. So have you seen this or no?
Gerard was the featured producer in our Languedoc episode, and his philosophy is just what you said. Like they're not afraid to try new things. They like that region gives them freedom because, again, not every French wine region does. And not only is there freedom legally to maybe do different blends, different styles, play with lots of grapes, there's also no expectation. Some places don't have the freedom because they're expected to make a certain style. And again, like they don't have that there. And so they can kind of do whatever they want, whether they want to make an unfiltered wine. He messes around with orange wines a lot. Mm-hmm. He's got a whole range of wines from like super affordable entry level to super high end. Yeah, they have the ability to do what they want there.
The wine that we're drinking is from the Costieres de Nimes. And so this is not technically part of the Languedoc-Roussillon, and it's sort of wedged between there and the Rhone Valley in southern Rhone. And so this idea that like, you know, the Languedoc's huge, the Rhone is fairly large as well, but there's also these places that are sort of like wedged in the middle where if you find yourself like moving outside of these designated areas, you can often find some really interesting things. And to that end, I wanted to ask you, because I know you've been to a lot of places that maybe don't see the main stage of the wine world kind of in the way that like a Costieres de Nimes white would. What are some of the places that you've been and how did you find them?
Some of the places that we've been on the show recently, we just did Lebanon, which was actually a really amazing, really, special one for me. You know, I'm half Lebanese. My great grandparents emigrated from Lebanon. And so when I started the show, I said, I'd like to get there one day. That would be, if I could just do that and then the show is over, then that's fine. As long if I got to do that, that would mean I've achieved something. And so I got to bring my brother along on that trip. And that was not only a special trip personally, and if you watch the episode, you'll see that, but from a wine perspective, didn't go in knowing much. I mean, I think most people know Chateau Moussard, which is very unique. And while they're wonderful, when we interviewed them, they don't represent Lebanese wines as a whole. Lebanese wines as a whole are so much more than that. The number one thing that I noticed when I was there was altitude. So they're the highest altitude for growing grapes in the Northern Hemisphere. You know, if you go down to the Southern Hemisphere, you get, you know, places like Argentina that are harvesting in altitude, but Lebanon's the highest in the Northern Hemisphere.
Interesting.
Because you think about Lebanon, it's a Middle East country. You think it's going to be very hot in the desert.
Sure.
Not a desert at all. There's no desert, in fact, in Lebanon. It's the only place in the Middle East that doesn't have a desert. They have mostly coastline. Their whole side of the country is coast, and everything else is mountains. It's pretty wild.
Interesting.
Go on. And so harvesting at altitude allows them to retain freshness to the wines that you wouldn't expect from a Middle East country.
And so how did you know how to navigate that? Lebanon, I think on the insider side of things, like as a wine professional, to your point, we know Chateau Moussard, but like I wouldn't even know where to begin with knowing how to navigate it, which producers to look at. How did you craft that journey on that episode?
So typically when I go somewhere, I work with the wine board of the region, right? I'm talking to them so we can help plan it. But what I did with this episode specifically was we did 4 producers. And I wanted them all to be different. And that's kind of my goal in any episode, honestly, is to represent, if I'm doing multiple producers, let's represent different styles. If I'm doing one producer, let's do at least a few different styles of wine or different regions that they make. With Lebanon, we had Chateau Moussard, they're very famous. They have a very unique style. We did Gassier, which is a newer winery doing very modern style wines, you know, more French oak, maybe harvesting a little riper. We had Saint Thomas, which was a family-driven winery, you know, small family-owned winery. And then we have Chateau Cassaro, which is the oldest winery. And so we kind of crafted it like that. We said, let's do different producers, all 4 of them having something unique to bring to the table. And they all made different styles of wine and had different philosophies. And that was what's fun, is because they're bringing different philosophies, you end up with different blends, different kind of styles. Some are using indigenous grapes. So Merwa and Obeidi are 2 white indigenous grapes from Lebanon that are pretty popular. But then many use French for the reds because they were a French colony for a long period of time. And so they have a lot of French influence. So they're doing a lot of Bordeaux-esque blends. I say Bordeaux blends, but they were actually blending like Bordeaux Rhone blends together. They were doing like Cab and Syrah and Merlot or something like that. It was really interesting and fun.
Old school Bordeaux back when they were blending that in.
Yeah. So, but like, again, like I think we said we wanted to talk about how you can get different flavors when you go to different places. And that's an example. Like when you put Syrah into those blends, you end up with a wine that's unique to that place. I haven't had a wine that tastes like that has the plushness and kind of backbone of Cabernet, the roundness and plumminess of Merlot, and then that spice character of Syrah. Like, where else does that exist? Not many places.
I get a question a lot, and I wonder, I'm sure that you do as well. I wonder how you answer it. And the question is, usually around a wine region that is maybe local to a person. So for example, I get a lot of people who are like, I love going to these wineries in Maryland. I love going to these wineries in Arizona. What do you think? And a lot of times I haven't been to these places, but I think given that we're talking about some of these lesser known hidden gem regions, I'm sure people ask you the same thing. What is your response to a question like that? Because I have my own, but I'm curious, as we're sort of trying to navigate and dig deeper, what would you say to that?
Well, the number one question I get, it's similar but slightly different, which is basically come to an episode here. Like everybody wants me to come to an episode in their home state. And what's wonderful is that all 50 states produce some form of wine, right? So there's a winery somewhere in your state that you can go visit, which is really great. We did an episode in Virginia. I just got back from a speaking engagement at a Minnesota winery. So I'm not, I've been to North Carolina wineries. I'm not completely unfamiliar, but my big thing is like, one, come into these wine regions with an open mind, because a lot of times they're doing the styles that work for their terroir. And that's a good thing. And that might be different styles than what you prefer. It might be hybrid grapes or not vinifera grapes. So you have to come into these with an open mind. For me on the show, I hesitate to use the word issue, but the issue is that a lot of these wines aren't exported, right? They're not found across the country. And so for me to come make a show there can sometimes be a challenge, because I can show people it, but then they want to taste it. And it's kind of challenging to find the grapes in their local market. But the great thing about these wineries is the ones that are doing it right. Like I just went to Sovereign Estate in Minnesota, and they create a community around the winery. And that's the best part of it.
Yeah.
You have events, music. You can come up there with your, significant other, your family. You can spend the weekend there. To me, the wineries that are doing it the best in those kind of markets that maybe aren't the blue chip regions that are going to be heavily exported are the ones that form that community and really help kind of foster this sense of, inclusiveness and fun around the winery.
Yeah, I agree. I think there definitely needs to be community involvement. I think those who can reflect their terroir, this is maybe not the right term, but accurately, are usually the ones that I like the most. But my response to that question is usually like, my opinion does not matter in any way, shape, or form. But if you want your opinion to matter, which I think, it should, yours is the only one that counts. The things that you can and should be looking for to know that you're in a good spot is, number one, like, are they talking about how they're growing the grapes? Whether it's hybrid, whether it's vinifera, whether it's, a variety that you've never heard of before. Is it something that they're talking about? And is it something that they are clearly passionate about? Because, outside of, like, I've been to some wineries where they're like, we're making, a cream wine from some like grape that like they don't even care about. Right. And it's this whole other like Franken wine situation. But then I go to other places and, they clearly care about the land. And then, you go and see how they're making the wines. And so I think for me, maybe it's not a question of whether or not you need my approval. It's a question of whether or not this is the style of wine that you like. And there's so many different styles of wines being produced. But at the end of the day, are they being produced with integrity? And Not every place does. That's a given. But I think there's some incredible places like in Virginia. I don't know if you got to Early Mountain. Like that was one of my favorite places that I had been to where they're producing Petit Manseng. And it's not a grape that I would normally gravitate toward, but they were so passionate about it and they couldn't show me enough things around Petit Manseng and how they were doing and all the wacky ways that they were crafting it that I was like, you know, even if it's not what I would drink, it's what someone should be paying attention to because it's indicative of the terroir and it's indicative of the wineries. So I think for those who are trying to explore into their local areas, like those are the things you should be paying attention to on the website. Are they farming? Are they talking about the grapes? Are they producing things on site? And the other, I think, important thing is how much do they care about food? Because food, I think, matters. And if you're outside of California where people can be doing like good quality food with their wine, also we'll talk about food in California. That's a big plus. Like definitely take advantage of that. I think wineries that do food really well are incredibly important. I mentioned Virginia. You mentioned Virginia. We talked about Lebanon. Where else are you excited about?
Oh, man. So I did. It's maybe not quite off the beaten path anymore. It was a bit ago, but I'm huge on Portugal. I love Portuguese wines in a general sense. And if you're like, first time in Europe, where should I go? I'd probably send you to Portugal.
Yes, I could not agree more. The friendliest, loveliest, but it's perfect. I love Portugal. Continue.
I don't ever expect when I go to a foreign country, everybody to speak English, right? I mean, that's a rude thing to do. But you go to Portugal and they not only like can speak English and guide you, they're so excited to show you their culture. Yeah. They're so excited that you're there. It is affordable. It's especially compared to maybe France and Italy, even Spain, which can be a bit more affordable. Even Portugal's more so. And then Portugal owned half the world at one point. And so they have this history of, they have all these historical monuments and they have all this kind of architecture that you need to see. And we haven't even gotten to food and wine yet. Yeah. And it's condensed is the other thing. You can see a lot of the country. Like if I was going the first time, I might do just Porto and Lisbon and maybe somewhere near the coast. But you can see a lot of the country in a very short period of time. And then the wine styles are super diverse within a very small plot. So if you go north, you're very close to kind of Rías Baixas, Spain area. So there you get to Vino Verde and they're making Alvareños, but they're not just making the kind of cheap green sparkling wines, which are fun. They're making really high quality Vino Verde that is oftentimes lees aged and can have this kind of rich, creamy mouthfeel and get into melon and tropical notes. And then you go a bit south and you have Porto, and you can not only get in the world of port, but they have all these wonderful still wines from the Douro. And then you keep going south and you can get into Alentejo below Lisbon. And now you're into these kind of rich California-esque bold reds. And every place has its own food that goes with it too. If you're into seafood, especially, it's mind-blowing. So I'm like very, very bullish on visiting Portugal if you can.
I couldn't agree more. And I've really actually only officially visited the Douro Valley and then Vinho Verde. And I fell in love with both. They're both incredibly different. And I think the key, as you mentioned, is just like the food, the wine, the culture, just like immerse yourself in it and don't be afraid. The only thing I will say is the Douro can be a little tricky to navigate because you literally have a river running through the two sides of the Douro Valley and you can't get across super easily. Like it's a long drive to the bridges. So just keep in mind. But, I think that it's one of those places that if you go, definitely branch out into some wine regions and like ask your hotel for recommendations, book a tour. Like this is where you should definitely feel like you can feel adventurous. And they're places that lend themselves to being adventurous. If you go to Burgundy, if you go to Bordeaux, those are not places that you can be super adventurous. Like you kind of have to have a pretty solid game plan. But this is what I love about venturing into these like parts unknown is you can have like a little bit of spontaneity around it. I love Portugal. I think that's a great one. I was just in the Finger Lakes and had a great time. I really hesitate to say up and coming because they've been growing grapes since like the 1960s, but they have been making wine in a very real way for the last like 20, 30 years. And in the last, I would say 15, we've seen a huge improvement in the quality as people start to embrace hybrids in a different way and also bring in the Vitis vinifera. And I think what's interesting there is like, it's really affordable, almost as affordable as Portugal. Like I didn't find a wine tasting in the Finger Lakes for more than like $20. Most of the wines are under $20. But what I love so much about the Finger Lakes is they really respect the region and the terroir there. And they embrace the fact that they are very much cool climate. So you're not going to get huge, over the top, big ripe reds like you would in California. You're going to get leaner, cooler wines like Cabernet Franc that feel like they're from the Loire Valley, high acid Rieslings. And so that's a place that I would definitely, if you are feeling like you want to be adventurous and you want to explore, I would definitely head to the Finger Lakes regions.
I do love the Finger Lakes. 2 points. Number one, something you had mentioned earlier about, we were talking about Virginia and kind of what do you look for in a newer wine region? Mm-hmm. One of the big things that I think takes a wine region, especially when they're first starting from good to great, is a sense of community among the winemakers.
Yes.
So you kind of need a critical mass because everybody, if you think about one winemaker on an island doing harvest after harvest, they only have one shot a year to figure out things and they got to, make their tweaks and they got to wait another year. But you have the collective knowledge of many winemakers all doing the same thing. And if there's a spirit of community where they share that information with each other, hey, I trestle like this. Hey, I harvested this grape. Hey, I planted this on this altitude or this slope and it worked better. You start to end up getting higher quality wine all around.
Yeah.
Virginia had that. Finger Lakes had that. Some of those other smaller regions that are up and coming, that's one of the challenges they face is like they're just kind of waiting. It takes 15 to 20 years. Like you mentioned, that's about how long it took for the Finger Lakes. Like It takes that much time to figure out everything. So when you look at those younger regions, oftentimes it's not like, are they making good wine or bad wine? It's, do they have the collective knowledge yet? Or do they still need a couple years to figure everything out? When I went to Virginia, they told me, they were like, I wouldn't have brought you here 5 to 10 years ago. Like today is great to come, but we needed that time. So that was the first thing that was interesting. And then the second thing that you mentioned that I love is exactly, they're using the terroir. They're not trying to do Cabernet Sauvignon because it's popular and they know if it's on their list, it'll sell. They're making Cabernet Franc at best for red wines. Maybe they can squeak by with something a little bigger, but they know that's not who they are. They're embracing the terroir. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. And I think you brought up a good point about community and like the winemaking community. One of the great hacks or tips for discovering new places, and like this is how you sort of plot your adventure, make an appointment somewhere or figure out where you want to start and do your damnedest to meet with the person who either owns the winery or makes the wine, someone at the very, very top. Find out who they have dinner with. Find out who they have drinks with. On the winemaking front. Those guys, birds of a feather. I'm telling you, this is the best way to figure out where the great places are because those guys all hang out. You see this in every wine community. Winemakers don't want to hang out with other winemakers who make wines that they don't respect and appreciate. It's just a fact. So it's a great way to discover other places and like plot your course from there. All right. So Finger Lakes, we love. Lebanon, we love. Virginia is super interesting. I would throw Michigan out there as one that is definitely moving in a great direction. And that was actually what made me think of this like birds of a feather idea is we found a few places thanks to a winemaker that we had met there. We're like, who are your friends here? Who do you like hanging out with? And same goes for like a local wine shop in those regions, find out who the local wine shop owner and the workers really love. Where else should people be looking at for under the radar, cool hidden treasure gems?
Yeah, it's not going to sound like it's under the radar, but so I have a rule. My rule is famous grape or famous place, not both. Like if you want something that's a good value, you can only get one of the two, right? Like I can get a great wine from Napa for a good price, but it's not going to be Napa Cabernet Sauvignon. It's going to be Napa Merlot or Syrah by the same producer.
That's a great tip.
So I can swap one of them. And then the other thing is the reverse of that. If you go, I want great Pinot Noir, but Pinot Noir is a notoriously challenging grape to grow and it has a reputation and it's expensive even in places that weren't previously, like Oregon. I remember when Oregon Pinot Noir was moderately affordable and now it's kind of blown up. I went to Chile And we went to Casablanca and we had some insane Pinot Noirs that were different than anything else I'd ever had. They were kind of like a hybrid. The closest I would describe them is maybe New Zealand Pinot Noirs, but they had a bit more kind of plushness and freshness than that. Casablanca, they also made some great Sauvignon Blanc. So again, like Chile, not an off the beaten path region, but if you go to other places in the Elqui Valley in the north of Chile, they're known for some pretty amazing Syrah. So I'm big on getting out of the main blue chip regions and trying some of their wines, even in a country that is quote unquote already established and famous. That's another way I can find that.
That's a great tip. I think there's also a lot of producers, mainstream producers will set up shop in other places. Like, for example, we're going to have a wine in our podcast shipment. So Chuck Wagner, who owns Camus, he started to invest in Suisun Valley, which is just the county adjacent to Napa Valley. He started to invest in that in a very big way, I think about a decade ago. And so Suisun Valley is like a place that, sort of remains off the beaten path, but is one of these regions that a lot of people are paying attention to because he's invested so much money. Paul Hobbs, another big name, is certainly Napa Valley, but setting up shop in lots of different places around the world. I think most recently in the Finger Lakes. So there's little clues that you can look for, whether it's producers or whether it's just like, watching obviously Vias for Vino, listening to this podcast, little clues that let you know where to look for next. What are your clues though? Because you're sort of on the front lines.
The cool thing about our community is because of what we do, I'll start getting people chirping in my ear about things organically. Like our fans will be like the one that people keep saying, besides Michigan, I've heard a lot about, is Idaho. Everybody keeps telling me, come to Idaho, come to Snake River Valley. We're doing some incredible things here. And so that's one that I'm kind of interested in. From an international standpoint, I get some really fun ones. India, believe it or not.
Yeah.
India, people are hitting me up and saying, you have to come to India. Brazil, they're saying they're making some great sparklings. And they even have this technique because of the way they are and their elevation and their kind of line where they are on the globe. They can do 2 harvests per year.
Yep.
So they have this really unique thing. So I get enough people kind of who are on the ground, literally on the front lines, telling me, you have to check out what we're doing. You have to check out what we're doing. So that's my source.
2 things on that. So Jean-Charles Boisset, originally from Burgundy, but lives in Napa Valley now. He has a project in India and he makes an Indian sparkling. And it's quite good. He does it with like one of the best producers there. And then also, because Portugal has such a big population of Brazilian expats, there are a lot of Brazilian wines that make it there. So there's a little natural wine bar called Genuino. And that is where I had my very first Brazilian pet nat, and I was blown away. Yeah. So, obviously, like when you travel to a place that has wine around it, not everything is going to be great. Like we can sit here and give you all the advice in the world, but like, the truth is maybe if you go to 5 places, 1 you're going to love, but that's 1 more than you knew before. And to me, it's just an exploration of a region, a great way to get to know the culture, but also like a great way to get to know your palate without it being adulterated by your surroundings and other people. So I fully support getting out there, just trying new things and then trusting what you feel, what tastes right to you, and just talking to people. And I think that would be my advice. But Vince, what's your advice?
Yeah, I'll give one more and then I'll give my advice. One more place that we haven't mentioned, which is basically all of Eastern Europe, because they have a lot of winemaking history over there. Like dry wines from Hungary right now are very, very fun. They're making a lot of stuff in Croatia. And these are areas I don't even know that well, but they're starting to really come into their own because they have winemaking history. And now they're kind of reinventing themselves as, hey, we've done this style of wine for a long time, but let's try and do this style. Hungary's the classic example where they did the sweet wine, they did Tokaj, and then now you can find like dry ferment and all these fun wines that they weren't historically known for quite as much. Going back to what is the advice as you kind of are looking for places, I love your tip about asking the locals when you go somewhere. whatever you're doing, and not just for wineries, but in general. My first move when I go on vacation is I'm a cocktail head too. So I'll go to a cocktail bar and I'll ask the bartenders, where are they eating? Because that's just so huge. Like I can do it, like you said, I can do as much Google homework as humanly possible, but I'm not going to be the person, that's on the beaten path. That's the places with the most reviews. I want the places that, the locals are going. Start exploring the other section when you go into a restaurant or a wine shop. If I'm in a restaurant, I don't want to pay a 3.5 time markup for a blue chip wine region. I skip past everything that I kind of know. I'll save that for when I'm at home. I don't want to pay that markup. And I go to, sorry, my cat behind me. I will go to the other wine section. And that's the wines that don't fit anywhere else, right? That's the wines that we have one from this country or 2 or 3 from this country or from this region. That's where the value is, because they know people aren't going to buy there unless they're willing to kind of take a chance. So they have to price it a bit lower. It's a good way to explore different things. And it's often things that you can't find in your local market, right? Because they're working with the distributor. So if I'm in a restaurant or if I'm in a wine shop, I'm going to that section and kind of, I love messing around there.
And let me just tell you something on that front. As a wine buyer and former sommelier, there are so many levels of vetting that have to happen in order for an other wine to make it into a wine shop or on a wine list, that like, if it's there, it is there because someone believed in that wine. Not because it was an easy sell, but because someone was like, this is really good. It had to, first of all, it had to be imported by someone. So it had to start there. Then it had to be distributed by someone. Then it had to be purchased by someone. The layers that had to go through to make it onto that list or into that wine shop are so incredible when we're talking about regions like Eastern Europe or the Finger Lakes or Michigan. Like, if you see wines like that outside of those regions, buy them. There is a very good reason that it is on that list or in that wine shop. And it has everything to do with the fact that someone tasted that and they're like, that's an incredible wine. It deserves to be here and it deserves to be amongst the best wines that we have. So.
I mean, you nailed it on the head. That's the other reason is the somms or the restaurant owners, like, at a good restaurant, they're supposed to be doing that for you. They're supposed to be curating a list that's the best of the best with their cuisine or the style of wine that they enjoy. And so they've kind of done a lot of that sifting out for you. So take advantage of it rather than you walk in and maybe you don't know what you're buying at a shop. Talk to the shop owner or talk to the somm, because they've done that curating. Yeah.
And I love this advice about, if you're looking for value, you can have region and you can have grape, but you can't have both.
Have both.
I will never forget that piece of advice. It's such good advice. I think we kind of have the grape in this glass here. I mean, obviously Roussan, Marsanne, like, these are grapes that we know. I wouldn't call them like the most famous grapes on the planet, but certainly more of a household name in the southern France and in Rhone, and certainly in Costieres Nimes. This has changed pretty dramatically. I don't know about for you, but as this has warmed up, it's gotten even like more golden and like more like yellow pear, very like
I started
appley.
To get some beeswax honey thing a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of now it's kind of like some of the florals have kind of faded more into the background. So
and the minerals started to come through too.
Definitely.
Yeah, this is like, also I meant to say earlier. Yeah, I think I don't know what the retail cost. I think it's under 30.
It's under 30. I think SRP is like 26 or something.
I mean, this is your Thanksgiving wine. This is a great Thanksgiving turkey white that is a price point where you don't mind busting it out by buying 3-4 bottles and offering it to everybody, because one, it's a crowd pleaser. Chardonnay drinkers will like it. Wine nerds will like it. People who like wines with some acidity will like it. It's a crowd pleaser. It pairs with everything you're going to have on the table. And the price point is there. So that's like your perfect group wine.
Yep. It's so funny you say that, because when I wrote the tasting notes for this wine, that was one of the things that I mentioned was like, this is a Thanksgiving wine for sure. It goes super well with all of these like fall vegetables that are about to come into season. So all of your squashes, your carrots, your turnips, all that stuff.
I thought squash right away.
so good with squash. And in fact, all of the wines in the shipment are actually they're usually very food friendly, but they're food friendly for Thanksgiving. So I definitely kept the season in mind for us when I selected some of these wines. So I'm so glad that we're all on the same page. Vince, where can the people find you?
Oh, it's so easy. You can just go to YouTube and you type in V is for Vino. V is for Vino, one word or many words, and it'll come up either way. And all the episodes are free because that's really, really important to us. So I wanted to create a product that provided free wine education. That's kind of our core ethos, our mission. And so you can watch for free. If you want to go further, you can always join our VIP club. That's where you get ad-free episodes, you get behind the scenes, you get other stuff, but you don't have to do that. You can watch the episodes for free on YouTube and have a good time learning about wine. And we often sell the packs from the wines from the episodes too when we release a new episode. So if you wanted to kind of do a taste along with us, we usually offer that. You sign up for our email list and we'll let you know when we got the packs available.
Love that. Well, thank you so much for doing what you're doing, for making wine approachable and easy to access. We so appreciate it. To all of you listening, it has been a pleasure as always. You can find all of the links to things that we talked about, as well as the link to sign up for the wine club in the description below. And until next time, we will cheers and see you guys later. Cheers. Thanks, Vince.